A very good evening to you. Welcome to another Newsmaker Live broadcast right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polian. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we conclude with the clip that peaked. Please log on to our Facebook page and participate in the conversation. I have a special guest in studio, and we're focusing on the National Insurance Corporation because the NIC has gotten more attention over the last week, more attention than it has gotten since it was established in 1970. And it's for good reason, because anytime you're talking about any government deciding to borrow funds from the National Insurance Corporation, that is a very sensitive issue, a matter of political concern as well as a matter of concern to the citizenry and contributors. My guest this evening is the individual who responded to the allegations made by the opposition, and he made the response on behalf of the government of St. Lucia. He is the minister in the Ministry of Finance, also recently appointed the minister with responsibility for the public service, Dr. Eubaldus Raymond. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Tim.
But before we hear from you, let's take in a report from DBS's Don Nicholas. That report was filed this evening, in which Prime Minister Alan Chastanet is responding to claims that were made by the opposition, in particular the political leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party, Mr. Philip J. Pierre.
A leaked document indicated that government is borrowing $100 million from the NIC to pay off maturing bonds. Opposition leader Philip J. Pierre says there is no guarantee that the government will sell the bonds in time to repay the corporation. According to Mr. Pierre, this is an indication that the government cannot meet its obligations to the bondholders, hence the reason it had turned to the NIC for help.
And to make it worse, they're going to the NIC at 1% interest. These funds belong to pensioners. I am sure you could get that money in other investment portfolios at a much higher rate of interest. So these are worrying signs. All the flashing mirrors, the point is, the government, because of the serious fiscal situation, they cannot meet the $100 million that they owe investors.
Prime Minister Chastanet explained that this is a normal traditional practice where governments have approached commercial entities or the NIC to borrow short-term funds to help with the cash flow situation. He further stated that there is an independent board at the NIC to ensure that pension funds are not tampered with, and the corporation, he says, is very well financed.
As you're collecting your tax revenues and as you're issuing out new bonds and turning over those new bonds, there generally tends to be a cash flow disruption, which is absolutely normal.
The Prime Minister says he's embarrassed by the opposition's attempt to play cheap politics with the stability of the country. For the DBS News World, I'm Don Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Don, for this report. It was filed this evening during the DBS News World. Dr. Raymond, welcome to the broadcast once again. The government is reacting to the allegations were made by the opposition, but should it have been in that position? Don't you think that the government should have leveled off with the people of St. Lucia from the outset to make the revelation that it was thinking of, or it intended to borrow monies from the National Insurance Corporation to finance the maturing bonds?
Tim, that's not needed, and this is basically was an administrative procedure, and therefore there was no need for the government to go to the public and inform the public that they are engaging the NIC in terms of that bond. On the other hand, if it was a loan that was undertaken under the Finance Act, then the requirement of that is that it goes through cabinet first, and then it goes through parliament. So this is a normal process. This is a normal process. I mean, you would know that the former administration, they actually undertook the very same bridge financing, and that was done, I think, October 15th. 2015.
But you're talking about $40 million
then? It doesn't matter.
Right now it's a more substantial figure.
No, we are talking about the process about informing the public. And that was required. This is not a requirement under that act.
But even all as has transpired right now, resulting in the government having to do some kind of damage control. Don't you think that going forward that the government must adopt a new approach dealing with NIC funds?
No, I don't think so, Tim, because as I said to you, it is a normal process, a normal procedure.
But it is still not to be so normal in the eyes of members of the public and also some pensioners.
No, in the eyes of the opposition.
But why should you be so preoccupied with the opposition? Don't you think that is a folly on the part of governments when certain issues come up, that instead of looking at what impact those sentiments or those issues would have on people who would be impacted, instead of looking at it from that perspective, I focus on the source of the allegation or the person who is making the claim?
Because they are making it an issue and it's not an issue. That's the point. And I'm saying the opposition leader is either showing his ignorance of the operations of the NIC, and especially when it comes to the issuing of bonds and the borrowing of bonds by the government, or he's just playing political, just being mischievous politically. Either the two is not good for him. This is not an issue, as I said in the past. As I said to you in the past, this has been a normal process. And there is no need to go to the public and saying that it's administrative thing. You have an issue. In this case here, we have an issue with, not an issue, but you have a situation where the bonds will be maturing at the end of this month. And of course, what happens within the Department of Finance, the individuals within the debt units, they would go out in the market to test the market as to the appetite of the financial market for the mature bonds. And I can say to you, as we speak, there is a heavy appetite for these two bonds, heavy appetite. The requirement by the institution that actually holds the bonds is that the bond amount, the principal amount, must be deposited in that account before or at the mature date of that bond. So what the government has to do is to put
You're referring to the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange?
No, well, the RGSM, yes, that is where the money was borrowed, the bond was borrowed. So it became due, and that's where you actually put that money. You put that money in the lender's account. When that happens, after maturity, that's when the issuer of that prince or that bond decides whether or not they move forward with that bond. We have not reached there as yet, Tim. So I'm hearing talk about investors' confidence in the country. This is just political mischief, Tim. We have not reached there as yet. And as I said to you earlier, when as we speak, there is a heavy appetite for these two bonds. So what we approach the NIC for is to basically, in the event that the holder of these two bonds decide they're not going forward, or they want this thing to be rolled over, they don't want to roll over the bond, we have a backup. We are able to, in order to, we want to ensure that we move forward with the affairs of the operations of government in terms of cash flow. And that is what we'll be depositing within the Treasury. So the Department of Finance is working, has done exactly what is required of them on behalf of the government. So I am very almost embarrassed, Tim, just like as a Prime Minister, that a political leader would make such a statement. And this is a guy who has been in government for such a long time, and for him not to understand the operations of government, especially with regards to bonds, and he's making a mockery of himself.
But what is very important, what is more important, the stance being taken by the political leader and you giving the impression that he's ignorant of the process, or you taking the lead on this particular matter and ensuring that you're very thorough in terms of discussing the process, explaining the process to the man in the street, because that's very important.
Well, Tim, that is exactly what I'm doing right now. That's exactly what I'm doing right now, because
because I'm just saying, I'm just saying politicians, ruling politicians, when the government is just too much of a preoccupation with what the opposition says.
Yes, but I think the government, you see, Tim, this administration has hardly or seldomly responded to this opposition, And we understand the politics that they're playing. We understand that. It's a diversion of what they want to divert the attention to them.
But do you understand
yes.
that there are many people even watching the broadcast this evening, several
yes.
days after this revelation,
right.
who do not understand what the process is all about? We don't understand bonds, the maturing of bonds, and government borrowing from the NIC.
Right.
And there's need for the government to look at it from that perspective,
I
as
agree.
opposed to being
yeah.
preoccupied with the opposition.
I don't think I am preoccupied, or this government is preoccupied. I think it's the government has a responsibility to quell the fear-mongering of the opposition. I think we need to do that. First of all, let the public understand exactly what the opposition is doing. They're creating political mischief. They're trying to divert people's attention and put fear in the people's minds. So I have to allow the people, or let the people understand this is exactly what the opposition is doing. They're not concerned about pensioners because they know exactly what they're saying is not true. It's not true. So that was dealt with, Tim, with my statements on Monday. Now I'm here tonight to try to provide some clarity as to the process that's involved in all of this.
In the terms of transparency and letting the people know what the government is doing on its behalf, on their behalf, don't you think going forward, the lesson from this is that this government should be informing the public when it decides to borrow funds from the National Insurance Corporation?
It will not hurt the government at all. It will not hurt the government. But the issue here is not about the government not telling the public, you know. Mm-hmm. The opposition makes it look like it was just the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And the fear of we are tampering with the pensioners' funds. That is what they put out there. So we had to deal with that. It was not about transparency. Absolutely not, Tim.
How can the pensioners be assured that their benefits are not in jeopardy? The old lady was listening to this broadcast this evening, who gets a pension from the NIC, maybe less than $1,000. She's hearing that the government is borrowing her money, $100 million. That's a lot.
Tim,
what assurance can you give her this evening? Explain.
I can say to you, Tim, that the pensioners' funds are not being tampered with. The pensioners' funds are safe the way where they are.
What makes it safe?
Because we have a board, first of all. We have a board that has been appointed by the government, and governments always ensure that they elect, or they not elect, but they appoint people with the requisite skills and knowledge and qualifications to undertake these positions. And we have a chairman in the person of, I think, Isaac Anthony, and we have individuals like Frank Myers. And these are individuals who are, in terms of financial prudence and discipline, they have that. In terms of lending, this is a policy of one of the policies of the NIC to lend the funds. It's a policy. In fact, as part of the asset base or categories, asset base of the NIC, it's required that they lend to non-government organizations or persons, 20 to 25% of the asset base. And when it comes to government, they can borrow up to 30%. So 55% of the asset base alone could be actually lent out. How do you think NIC raise their funds or increase their funds for the pensioners? Through lending. So lending is a policy of the NIC.
Yeah, but you have an investment committee and you have a board. The board would have been set up basically handpicked in terms of the chairman, in terms of the other directors by the government.
Right.
Because the Minister of Finance is responsible for the NIC.
Yes.
Who is to say that getting a call from the Minister of Finance, Mr. Alan Shaston, saying that we want to borrow $100 million to defray the cost of these maturing bonds and so on, that any chairman, any member of the investment committee would be brave enough to say no?
The only involvement of the Prime Minister in terms of bonds is the approval. Okay? The Department of Finance is the one engaging, or that engages the NIC in terms of the terms of the borrowing.
Okay.
Yes.
How does it start? The whole process. Walk us through it, if you're aware of it. How did you reach a point where the government decided to borrow the $100 million from the NIC? Did the government just realize that we need this money because come month end July, we needed to pay those 2 bonds? How did it all start?
Well, Tim, again, you would know when your bonds will be due, okay? You would know that. You have that maturity date, all right? And as I said earlier, it's about continuation of the operation of government in terms of cash flow. Now, the question, you can actually borrow from what we call private placements like banks and so on, or you can borrow from the RGSM, the Regional Government's Security Market. Now, if you borrow from the private placements, the banks and so on, generally when the loans become due or about to mature, they may issue a letter and say, look, we will continue with that bond. We will roll over that bond. With the RGSM, it's a little different, okay? You'd need that money, actually, the principal amount, as I said earlier, to be deposited in an account. And when you do so, that's when they would decide whether or not they'll roll over. Now, rollover has never been an issue, Tim, in this government. This government has never defaulted in its loan. In fact, it's a requirement of the Finance Act that the first order of business in terms of government expenditure is paying our debt. So the government has an extremely enviable position or reputation in terms of paying back their loans. So that's why I was very concerned that, you have an opposition leader who's supposed to be knowledgeable, but he's it's a matter of creating almost panic in the system. But I've spoken to individuals, Tim, who are in the know, and I'm saying to you, I'm upfront, that he will not create that kind of panic and panic in the market, because there are people who understand how it works. And I believe, as I said to you, when I say the man is making a mockery of himself, he is, because he has lost his reputation as what he referred to himself as an economist. Because to make these kinds of statements in the public, Tim, there is a limit. There is a limit to politics, and when it comes to injuring your professional reputation, on the altar of political expediency, Tim, it is something that one has to be very careful with. And as I said to you before, Tim, there are many things that the opposition has said, and I have not taken them on, but with this one, Tim, you talk about people who have worked so hard for their monies and expecting that at a certain age or when they fall sick or something, they have the monies. They can actually access the monies from the NIC, and you are creating that kind of fear and among these individuals. That is not fair, Tim. That to me, that is irresponsible. And I believe, as a government minister, I have a right to speak on behalf of these pensioners and the people of St. Lucia.
But are there instances where, for example, governments have defaulted in such loans? For example, there are instances where, for example, in the case of some natural disaster, I think in one case, this would have happened with one particular regional state where they're not able to pay the full amount, but they would default somewhat and pay something like 60 cents on every dollar. But this is rare, but it has happened.
It has happened, but it hasn't happened in St. Lucia. And, coming into government, we understood some level of the debt situation that we are facing in this country. Very, very. And in fact, coming to government, before government, we understood some things, but coming to government, we understood the full impact of the debt situation on our economy. Very full. And that's why we took a very proactive approach, Tim, in how we deal with our debts going forward. And I can say to you that based on the policies that we have undertaken, there is heightened confidence in the market for our bonds. High confidence and high appetite for our bonds. So we understand that it is important to control our debt. It is something that we cannot avoid to some extent, because we are over $3.2 billion, Tim, in debt. $3.2 billion. And guess what? We pay on average, we pay about almost $180 million a year in interest rate alone, Tim. $180 million. Okay? And you're talking about almost $80 million of that interest rate alone occurred under the last administration. $80 million in 4.5 years in interest rate alone. And when you look at the level of debt that we currently have, it occurred in the last 20 years. Now, in the last 20 years, how many times does this current administration have actually governed? 7 years. So most of the debt that we have currently, our debt stock, was contributed by this St. Lucia Labour Party administration.
And you're saying primarily because it was in office for 13 years?
No, let me correct that. Yes, not only that, Tim. You would be in a better position to borrow less if your economy is doing well. And under this administration, the Labour Party administration, they have always shown to kill the economy. The economy has always worsened under the Labour Party administration, always. And they always try to correct that with increased taxation. Now, Tim, this is just economic mess, chaos. When your economy is contracting and you're trying to revive that economy through increased taxation, that is just a political or economic disaster. And that is exactly the approach of the Labour Party. And that's why I believe, Tim, that the Labour Party administration has absolutely no legitimacy as far as giving this government advice, because they have failed in almost all areas. And that's why, Tim.
But if you're saying that the government, if you're saying that the St. Lucia Labour Party has failed in all areas,
yes,
don't you think that they are in a position to advise so that you do not go through those same pitfalls?
Tim, I ask you one question. How many times have the opposition advised in the last 2 years?
But,
0.
Yeah, but you just said that
all they do.
You just said that the opposition is not in a position to advise the government.
Yes.
So it's stands to reason based on what you're saying that could deduce from that.
But maybe
they have advised.
But maybe they know very well they cannot advise their government. Maybe they know that. So what they're doing is just attack everything that this administration is doing.
Isn't it a recurring theme? Something that both administrations have in common. SLP, United Workers' Party, is that they all do their fair share of borrowing.
But I said earlier,
they do their fair share of
borrowing is needed, Tim. I'm not saying it's not needed. It is needed. Okay, but I believe the controlling of that is important. All right. Now, if you have a policy in place and a policy in place as to how do you structure your borrowing, and what I mean by that, Tim, is that as a administration, we have decided that we will do our best to see how we can convert our short-term debt into longer-term debt. In other words, we are lengthening the time period in which we're going to pay back that principal. Lengthening. And of course, the more you lengthen that period, you're supposed to have lower interest rates. And I can say to you, we have been successful at doing so. So the level, if you look at the Economic and Social Review, you would see from 2016 to 2017, the interest rate on our debt has actually decreased.
But isn't that risky? Long term, God forbid, you have some global economic crisis that can impact us. Don't you think that if we have, for example, an economy that stagnates down the road, where will we get the money? Irrespective of whether the interest rate is low,
yes,
a loan is a loan. You still have to pay it.
Yeah, you have to pay it, but you have a longer time to pay it. So,
but I don't think that's analogous to a household. I mean, over a longer period, you pay a loan.
Yes.
But then you still have to pay it.
But you have to understand where we are now.
Whether the interest rate is low or not.
Yes, we have to understand where we are now. We have a lot of pressure on our cash flow. Okay, the government receives revenue, and in fact, our revenues are doing very well. When I look at, we get a report from the Inland Revenue Departments on a monthly basis, and when you compare month to month, we are doing very well. But Tim, in spite of that, the constraint on these increased revenues is our expenditures, and one of the biggest burden expenditure is that of our debt, and of course our salaries and wages and pensions.
And that's why you're coming as the newly appointed minister with responsibility for the public service. We'll focus on that in just a moment. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polion, and my guest, Dr. Eubaldus Raymond, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and also recently appointed Minister with responsibility for the public service. We conclude this evening with the clip that peaked, and long before that, we'll be taking your calls, so please stand by. Let's focus now on your new appointment. Minister in the Ministry, Minister for the Public Service. And you just, before we took the break, focused on the wage bill. What plans do you have for the public service, particularly in that regard? Because prime ministers in the past, this current prime minister, continue to speak about the wage bill and the problem. The Minister of the Public Service, you now focusing on this. But it is fair to say that you all have not done anything about it. When I say you all, this prime minister, previous prime ministers, and now you as a public service minister, newly appointed.
When you say nothing, I don't.
In terms of the public service, the wage bill, the huge wage bill.
Well, the wage bill is there. I mean, it's what we refer to as non-discretionary spending. It's money we have to spend. It's already on the books, and one of the ways the government can deal with it is what we refer to as attrition. People who retire, you just don't replace them, or you replace them at a lesser pace. So if 10 people retire, you replace 5 or 7. So there are different models you can use to control the wage bill.
But in the private sector, you think that's how it will have been handled?
Well, the private sector is different from that of the public sector. You have some essential services that you have to undertake. You must have as a government. You have the police, you have nurses, you have teachers, and the like. So it's a hot and difficult situation, not just only for this government, for all governments.
But it's an issue that has political implications as well.
Yes, of course, it has political implications, but more so, it has economic implications. You're talking about a situation where you almost 45 cents of every dollar we actually spend, Tim, is a lot is actually allocated for wages and salaries and pensions. 45%, that's a lot. And when you combine that with the interest rate on your debt payment, which is about 23%. So when you add 45 and 23, you almost 75% of your 75 cents on every dollar that you actually spend is spent on these two items alone, Tim.
How do you plan to deal with this particular problem?
Well, Tim, first of all, we have as a cabinet, as a government, we understand the situation we are facing. It's not, there's no magic bullet as far as how to fix that problem. The government, we had an initial approach where the government has put ministries into clusters and tried to use as many put many ministries as possible within one cluster, so that one PS can actually head that ministry. The government is also, as I said earlier, seeing how they can reduce on the payment for on his interest rate, interest payments, monthly interest payments or yearly interest payments, by lengthening the maturity period on its bonds and loans and so on. It's a tough situation, Tim, but we are dealing with it. There are certain things that you inherit, as I said earlier. You just cannot do away with it. What we refer to as non-discretionary. But we are taking steps. We are actually working towards ensuring that we have various what we refer to as expenditure controls. Even though the government revenues are increasing, we are having a lot of pressure on our expenditure, but we are trying our best to see how we can control our expenditures.
I don't think my viewers will be convinced that the government has the answers to the huge wage bill in the public sector.
Well, I remember sometime maybe 2 years or a year before the last administration, about 2014 thereabout, there was an attempt by the Labour Party administration to secretly, I would put it that way, reduce the wages and salaries by 5%. I don't know if you remember that, Tim. And it was brilliantly caught in the slips by our Senator Mary Isaac, and the government reversed that decision. That is not the intention of this government, to reduce anybody's wages or salaries. We believe it's unfair, because there are individuals who have actually made commitments on their current income, current salaries, and for the government of any government to go ahead and reduce that salary or wages by 5%, to me that is a very callous and irresponsible government.
So then, for the foreseeable future, I'll continue to hear from you and this Prime Minister and other Prime Ministers about the huge wage bill as far as the public sector is concerned.
Yes, I mean, when I say yes, I mean it's a situation that will linger for a very long time, Tim. Not unless...
So why continue to make reference to a problem that you cannot resolve?
Let's put it this way, Tim. We believe that one of the ways of reducing the wage bill is not by sending people home. There are voluntary ways of doing so, and that way is boosting up your private sector. Because, Tim, we have a lot of brilliant people in the public sector. Brilliant people. In fact, I was told by one of my colleagues, regional colleagues, that St. Lucia perhaps has one of the most qualified public service, very qualified. And we have a lot of our public servants, civil servants, who are actually qualifying themselves, either leaving the country or staying right here and qualifying themselves. So, and unfortunately, Tim, unfortunately, they have to remain in the public service, because the private sector does not provide them that avenue where they can actually use their skills and so on. So it's the government thrust in expanding and improving and creating the environment where we can expand the private sector. So individuals, when they are qualified, when they are well trained, they will not see the public sector as the only means of employment or only source of employment, but the private sector also.
But those qualified people you're making reference to, the abundance of qualified people, sorry, that you're making reference to in the public sector. Do you think that in the end, the talent and the skill is commensurate with the output?
Well, yes, maybe, well, yes, and probably no. Tim, we are, in fact, one of the assignments that I would be undertaking, allowing to be undertaken within the public service, is to look at skills match, or whether people actually have the requisite skills for the position that they currently hold. So that's something that will be undertaking within the public service. So, I mean, you have an individual. I only had an individual in my office sometime. Was it yesterday or day before yesterday? And this individual is just frustrated because she's actually working in a position that she believed that she can work she can provide a better service to the public in another position, in another area. So this is common throughout the public service, and so this is something that we, and being the minister responsible for the public service, I will address.
Because we've heard of many studies of green paper, white paper, etc. over the last several years.
Yes.
What will be done with that research?
Tim, let me tell you something. I met with a consultant who is about to complete a consultancy within the Department of Public Service.
In St. Lucia?
Yes.
Another one?
Yes, another one. And
why is the need for them?
I met with her. I met with her and my DPS and my PS sometime this week.
And we have to pay for that?
I'm not too sure where the funds came from, because I just came in, but I came in under this consultancy. And I said to them just the same thing you said. This will not be a paper that will be sitting on the shelves. We need the way forward with this, because it is very common, Tim, as you rightly said, you have a lot of consultancy and white papers just collecting dust. I don't believe in that. I believe in having a workable solution. Don't come to me and say you want to have a consultancy just for consultancy's sake. Let us put this consultancy, the results or the outcome of this consultancy or that consultancy to work. And that's exactly what I do intend to do within the public service.
Do you expect to encounter any difficulties in your work in terms of reforming the public sector? Because you would have to do so in collaboration with the representative of the workers, the Civil Service Association.
Well, I'm focused, Tip, right now with the team that I work with within the public service. And I believe we have about 9 or 8 departments. And I recently met with them. And we have laid out our work plan for the near, medium, and long term. And I believe that I have a very good team of leaders within the public service. And when I met with them, Tim, they basically gave me a brief overview of what they actually do within the public service, within the departments. Mm. And when it was my time to give my comments, and I asked myself the question, why does the public know about what you guys are doing? You guys are doing so much, and the public is unaware of what you guys are doing. So I can say to you, Tim, in the coming weeks and coming months, you will hear more of what the public service is doing.
You're watching Newsmaker Live. Once again, my guest this evening is the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and is also the Minister with responsibility for the public service. His name is Dr. Eubaldus Raymond. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. We have this break. We just took this break, and we'll take another break at 9:30, and then we'll be taking your calls. My guest this evening is Dr. Eubaldus Raymond, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, and also recently appointed Minister with responsibility for the public service. We turn our attention, we go back to the National Insurance Corporation. The monies borrowed from the NIC, the $100 million, would be repaid in some 30 days?
Correct.
Where is that money? Where will that money come from?
When does it come from?
The $30 million, the $100 million. How are you able to raise those funds to pay back to the NIC?
Well, it's a cash flow thing, Tim. As I said, when your loans are due or your bonds are due, you either have an opportunity, you either can pay it off or you can roll it over. That is if the lender agrees to roll over the principal. But in our case in St. Lucia, there is always the willingness to roll over our debts. The 100 million, as I said to you before, it will be used as a deposit, because remember, this bond was taken under with the RGSM, and the RGSM requires that deposit. The government, after 30 days, will have that money. Will have that money because, as I said earlier, it's a cash flow issue. So, if the government had the money off the bat, there will not be any need to borrow any money. Okay, so it's just with any business. There are times when your cash flow is not what it is in 1 month, and it is even better the months ahead. So it's a cash management way of dealing with you use bonds to deal with your cash management issues.
Now the interest rate.
Yes.
There's some confusion as to what is the interest rate. Is it 0.5%? Is it 2%? What exactly is it? What's the interest rate?
The interest rate, well, there is one leaked document, the first one, which showed 33%, I think it was. This is not the final decision. We were able to actually get half a percent.
It's 0.5%?
0.5%, yes, for just 30 days.
Are we robbing the NIC of monies in that regard?
I don't think
if the government had to borrow from some other agency, from some other financial institution, it would not have been 0.5% interest rate.
I wouldn't say that, Tim. It's a very short period, only 30 days.
Who determined the interest rate?
It's the negotiations between the Department of Finance and the lender. And as I said to you, the government has absolutely nothing to do with that. The executive has absolutely nothing to do with the outcome of this. The only authority that the Prime Minister has under the National Savings Development Bond is to approve. But the government, the Prime Minister, myself, or anybody within in the executive does not go out and have any negotiations with any financier in terms of bonds and loans are concerned. So we believe that the NIC, given the mandate to ensure that the funds of the pensioners grow, we believe that half a percent is something that they can deal with.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, going forward, what do you make of governments borrowing? Because you've said this, right? You said this just earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we change the paradigm shift? How would we decide that there's just too much borrowing and it has to stop? Does the government have some kind of some plan, long-term plan,
Yes.
to ensure that it really brings the borrowing under control? Because you said that we have about $3.2 billion right now in loan.
Correct.
That is a lot.
Correct. Well, Tim, the cash flow issue is always the problem. The government will always borrow money. Again, to deal with its cash flow issues. Okay, you have treasury bills and so on that mature in sometimes 60 days, 90 days, and so on. This again is to control your cash flow. But as far as the government is concerned, that we want to ensure, and we have made it clear, that in as much as possible, that if we are undertaking any new borrowing, that this revenue, that expenditure, that new loan, additional loan, carries its revenue. So we have done that with the road tax, and we have also done so with the airport tax. There are times that we require monies that may not be able to provide us with a direct revenue stream, but we want to ensure that when we do so, that it is an efficient, so to speak, an efficient borrowing. It's not a borrowing where I'm making reference to the administration, where the government would have borrowed $19 million a year, and the government did so for almost 5 years, in terms of using that money for a nice program, creating unsustainable jobs, as the last Prime Minister referred to it, unsustainable jobs. So to me, to use such monies, Tim, to me, yes, you are providing people with a job, with a salary, a wage at the end of the week, at the end of the month, or whatever it is. But the question is whether or not that this is efficient. And a study that was undertaken by the CDB, it showed that a lot of the monies that we are actually spending, especially the money we're borrowing, is very inefficient. That, of course, that was captured for the last 4 years, the 4 years of the last administration. So borrowing is not a bad thing, but it's what you do with the money, and how you decide to go out in the market. Whether or not are you just going to borrow at shorter time maturity dates, or are you going to borrow longer periods? So it's very dynamic, Tim, and I am not saying that it's wrong to borrow. You have to borrow at times, but you have to ensure that your borrowing is right.
What are the implications for government bonds in light of that controversy? Do you think it will be the government bonds will become less attractive?
Tim, as we speak, Tim, there is a heavy appetite for government bonds. There's a lot of interest in St. Lucia bonds, lots of it. In fact, Tim, last year alone, there was oversubscription for our bonds. In other words, if we go out to the markets and we try to raise $100 million.
But that's long before this particular controversy.
No, I'm just telling you, the appetite is still there. There's nothing that has caused a loss of appetite for our bonds. It's still there. Okay? I'm saying to you again that when we go out to the market to raise bonds, there is always an oversubscription. The Department of Finance would say to me that we have to tell the people out there to hold back. We have enough offer. That's enough. Okay? So, and just recently, the CARICRIS, the Caribbean, I think, credit rating agency, said that our credit rating is good. In fact, we were able to retain our credit ratings at a BBB. So if there was any issue as far as our ratings are concerned, our confidence is concerned, it would have been reflected in the CARICRIS report. But they have given us an A grade, so to speak, because we were able to retain our BBB ratings. So I want the public to know, and in fact, I said the public, especially the St. Lucian public, because they seem to be the one that is being, or trying to be misled with false information, with propaganda. That we as a government are doing extremely well. And I am not just singing, or we are not just singing our own praises. If you look at the IMF reports, Tim, you'll see that we are stabilizing things in the country. And don't forget, for one, the public should never forget what we inherited in this country. Absolutely never forget that. We inherited a mess, Tim. And we have stabilized this country. And we are seeing growth in this country. And suppose, for some reason, that this administration had not taken on the reins of governance in this country in June 2016, Tim, we would have been in a quagmire today. Because there was absolutely no growth policy of this last administration, absolutely none. Would have been, Tim, we were actually, I would say, 1 foot or half a foot down a precipice. Would have been down there. So we as a government we have done tremendously well as far as stabilizing this country is concerned, its fiscal position and growth. Look at our unemployment numbers. Look at it. We have moved from 25%. The last administration was the one who brought it to 25%. 25%. Now it's just about a little over 20%. The youth unemployment, when we came in, it was close to 50%. Today, Tim, it's about 38%. We have record numbers of tourism arrivals in St. Lucia. Tourist arrivals in St. Lucia, Tim. You no longer are hearing the closure of small businesses. Absolutely none. But when we came in, that's what was the norm. That was the norm. So we have changed things around. And that's why, Tim, I am saying to you, this opposition cannot touch this government as far as when it comes to economic performance is concerned. They cannot touch us. So they have resorted in political theatrics, and now they're touching everything and creating fear in the minds of people. But we as a government, we are focused, we are resolute, and we will not lose focus on what the people of St. Lucia have employed us to do or elected us to do.
You're watching Newsmaker Live. We'll take a break. When we come back, your turn. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television with my guest, once again, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, is also the Minister with responsibility for the public service, Dr. Ebaldas Raymond. We already have the telephone number on screen so that you can call with your questions and comments for my guest as we continue with the broadcast, which ends at 10 o'clock this evening. Minister, with regard to the NIC going forward, will you have any trepidation, any fear if you'll need to borrow from the corporation in the future? How do you envisage dealing with that issue, considering what had transpired?
Tim, what has transpired? What has transpired? The only thing that has transpired, as I said, is that the opposition is trying to create fear in the minds of people. There's no bad blood between NIC and the government.
Okay, we have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you on the air?
Hi, good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Just one question for the minister. You asked the question a while ago, though, but he never answered, so I just want to ask again. Where is the money coming from to pay back the loan that the government is taking from the NIC? And I'll listen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Tim, I think you answered it. You asked that question already. And as I said, it's a matter of cash flow. At the time when the month comes, I think it's the maturity date. I think is at the end of August. End of August, there'll be sufficient cash flow in government, and the government will be able to pay back that loan.
Okay.
Simple.
I think we have another caller 9. Hello. No, we've lost that call, but continue to call. And you're watching Newsmaker Live once again on DBS television. I'm not venture to pose a question to the caller, to my guest, because I suspect anytime from now we'll be having another contributor to the program. But it's very important that you call and you pose your question to Dr. Yubulda Streetman. You could also pose a question on the public service, because he was recently appointed as the minister with responsibility for the public service. Is that part of what the Prime Minister promised as a cabinet reshuffle? Because there were several, I think, weeks ago, he did promise that there will be a cabinet reshuffle.
I think he probably at him, and because it was not the intention of the government to shift ministers per se. I think it had more to do with the realignment of certain departments.
Okay.
Yes.
Good evening. Go ahead, please. This is Newsmaker Live. You on the air?
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Raymond.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the public debt as it stands today is $3.4 billion.
No, he said 3.2.
Yeah, the last time I checked was 3.2, yes.
Do you have the figures for 1996, prior to the SLP coming into government? What was the public debt?
The public debt, if I recall, sir, this was about $30 to $40 million.
$30 to $40 million.
Sorry, am I right? Yes, it was very extremely low. You know, I can't remember. I can't get it off. I can't remember off my head now, but it was extremely low.
So based on what you're saying there,
yes, sir,
the government of the SLP has brought the public debt from probably 30 million to $3.2 billion. Is that what you say?
Correct, sir.
Now,
no, sorry. Let me tell you what I said earlier. I said that within the last 20 years, the public debt has increased to what I think was about 2.2 billion. Put it this way, about $2.2 billion. And within that $2.2 billion, in fact, I had that analysis in Parliament some time ago. And the Labour Party is responsible for 75% of that increase.
Of that increase?
Yes.
Would you say that the SLP managed the economy properly?
Or
would you say that they were reckless in the borrowing?
That's your last question. Thank you.
Based on my own analysis, not own analysis, but based on the information that's out there in the Economic and Social Review, it shows that the Labour Party has performed miserably economically. And let us not forget, in the context in which, or in the environment in which the Labour Party actually governed, the Labour Party governed during rosy times, Tim, during economic prosperity. In the last 5 years, we talk about when we had already came out of the Great Recession. And yet still there were 3 years of negative growth where the country went backwards for three consecutive years, back to back, where we had burgeoning, we had increased debt levels, increased unemployment. So they had the best environment to make something good for St. Lucia, but they failed.
The increase in unemployment we're making reference to, especially youth unemployment, was a problem that was plaguing the global community. Eh? So it wasn't anything that was unique to St. Lucia, and as particularly youth unemployment has been a bugbear for most countries.
Well, when you look at the numbers in the Caribbean, St. Lucia was one of the leading ones. Then.
We have a call? Okay, we lost that call. I suspect we might have some slight problem with our telephone, but anyway, try continue to call. Let's see if we get the calls on the air for my guest. Once again, Dr. Ibaldas Raymond, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and also the Ministry with responsibility for the public service. Hello, good evening, you're on the air.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Good evening to you and to the Minister.
Good evening to you, sir.
Yes, wouldn't it be appropriate? Because, I mean, if you're running a household, you know, you would not, and you notice an item.
You what, sir? I want to hear every word you say.
Yes,
say it again, sir.
If you have noticed an item you want to purchase in a store.
Yes.
Okay, and then you have noticed the price. You would not want to just go and spend. You know, you'd want to build up the price. At least you make it up, and then you purchase the item. But what I'm getting is that, like, it seems to be some kind of uncertainty, because I'm not convinced as to where exactly that the government will be forcing the funds to pay back that loan in 30 days. To me, the water should be tested. Let's say you can make it in 30 days, 100 million. You should try. You should pay it. Like, try to build the funds in the 30 days, and then that way you not have to borrow the money. To me, no, because nobody really likes debt at this point in time and uncertainty. And I think, from a layman's point of view, that would be the better approach. You make your money in the 30 days, 100 million.
Yeah, but call it the bonds have matured, and you must pay it.
It has matured.
Well, not really paid. I mean, remember I said earlier, the requirement of the RGSM is that you have a deposit made of that principal amount. Like, if the principal amount is 100 million, you have to put that deposit in.
Unlike before, it's mandatory now.
Right. Okay. You understand? Yes.
So, in other words, what you're saying, the timing of it, you have to source that money to put it into the...
Sir, I can guarantee you the governments will be able to take care of that bond. There shouldn't be any panic.
Okay.
Maybe 30 days later you would see for yourself that what I'm saying is true. Okay?
Okay, well,
yes.
I'll be watching.
Yes,
okay.
Sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. We continue to take your calls. Once again, this is Newsmaker Live on DBS Television. Okay, we have another caller line. Good evening, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
Hello, I'm just assisting you, Mr. Raymond, that our debt in 1996 was about $450 million.
450, okay.
About $450 million. That's what our debt was in 1996.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. In fact, I think I was confusing that with the debt to GDP ratio, which was about 30%, and I confused that. So, yeah. So, think of it, Tim. Prior to the last election, prior to the Labour Party coming in 96, we had a $450 million debt.
We have a call. Let's take the call. Good evening. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
The question I have is that for the evening, Dr. Raymond has not really answered any of my questions. I think mostly every question he's been referencing the previous administration. And I think what people really want to know is that what are the plans that the present government has in place? And I'm thinking also in terms of the bond maturity. Isn't that something that you should have budgeted for rather than calling on the NIC 30 days before it's due?
When you say budgeted for, sir, what do you mean by that?
Okay. If I take a loan at a bank and I know that I have to start paying at the 1st of August,
right,
I would have had money on the side to pay that loan from the 1st of August. Right. I would not then go to the credit union the day before and ask them for money to help me to pay that loan.
Right. And I said earlier that there is always,
thank you, sir.
There is what they call cash flow, and in government and in business, there's always that issue. So you cannot just put money aside and say that, look, I am holding this money aside because we have we have bonds will be due at the end of the month, and you have salaries to pay, you have the government to operate, and so on. So we have other means of taking care of that in terms of ensuring that you have that money ready for when that bond is due, and that is just one avenue, the NIC. Simple as that.
Okay, we have another call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Bonsoir, les hommes de messieurs, bonsoir.
Bonsoir, monsieur. Ça va faire là?
Ouais, mon écoute, conversation qui gagne là, moi je vais en parole tout. Moi c'est technicien, mais la bête a manqué moi.
Nakuto.
Moi je là, le gouvernement qui l'a seulement, il t'a dit où c'est qui. Il paraît que c'est dans le gouvernement, il can change. Pour nous pas respect. Pour moi-même, observer le gouvernement qui est là, presently. C'est le même gouvernement qui est là, le gouvernement qui est là, manière nous faut leader, c'est d'aller mieux. Si vous m'avez même pour cette manière, le gouvernement avant de tirer, nous allons faire de la même manière. Quand nous pour tourner vers l'autre manière pour nous garder, qui ça nous va faire? Si nous n'avons pas work, en manière ici, nous allons work, nous allons mettre dedans. Mais right now, nous passons à l'élément de gouvernement avant d'aller, il fait PSS. Ils ont fait nous avant. Côté pour nous bonnes choses, c'est ça qu'il a actuellement pour le qui va gagner. Et c'est nous non pas comme si nous paix. Tout change le gouvernement ça veut faire. Ils veulent non plus. Ils ont tout observé à la différence. Ils ont observé ouais, ils ont même ça tout. Le gouvernement tout ça gouvernement ça fait là. Si le gouvernement ça sortir c'est là là, ils ont même couillé ça tout, ils même tout. Ils ont pris même. Ouais, tout ça gouvernement ça fait right donc mais quoi quand le gouvernement ça pas sortir. Merci monsieur, good night.
Okay, merci Pougué. We await another call, and we once again continue our discussion on the National Insurance Corporation with the maturing of the bonds and the government's decision to borrow $100 million from the NIC. This has sparked some kind of controversy in St. Lucia, in particular with regard to allegations made by the opposition St. Lucia Labour Party, and then a response from the government of the day, in particular coming from the minister in the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Eubaldus Raymond.
Tim, the previous caller, not the one before, he made mention that every question that is asked of me, not every question, but I make reference to the opposition. But Tim, one has to have a reference point. You cannot not speak of a reference point.
We have a call. Good evening. Thanks for holding on. You're on the air.
If you know your party's extension, please dial.
Hello. Okay. We have some confusion there. Mr. Producer, handle this particular problem, this issue. Yeah, he's saying all right. And then we'll continue to take your calls because there seems to be some kind of crossing of the lines. There's some mix-up there. But we continue to take your calls. The telephone number on the screen, 451-9788. Good evening. You're on the air?
Good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Eubaldus a question.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, he said that the bonds mature and we don't have the money to pay it now, so we have to go to the NIC to get that money to pay it. Right? Hello?
The bond has not matured. The debt matures the end of this month. But it's a requirement, again, I'm repeating myself, it's a requirement of the RGSM that prior to or a day or two before the debt matures, that a deposit is made in the account of that principal holder.
So what if in the next 40 days we find ourselves in a similar situation? What is the way out?
Sir, I can tell you, based on the analysis we have done within the Department of Finance, we will not be in any bad situation.
So we had not done that analysis before to ensure that we would not have found ourselves in that situation today.
I mean, what situation that we have found ourselves that is so bad, sir? It's a normal thing. It's a cash flow issue.
So
there
that's
are times.
What I'm saying. It's the normal thing.
Yes.
If the normal thing happens in the next 40 days, what would be our way out?
No, I'm telling you, we have made the analysis. We have done so. In fact,
so
when
let me tell you,
the
analysis before this present situation, we did not make the analysis.
Sir, when we go out in the market, you know what's going to happen? The bonds will be reissued. Okay? the bonds will be reissued. That goes to show the level of confidence that the market has in St. Lucian bonds.
I don't believe so.
Well, you don't want to believe it. That's up to you, sir.
Yeah, I don't want to believe so because we are in a situation right now, and you're telling me that you have made the analysis, you have done the analysis, and in the next 40 days you are not going to find yourself in that situation. But what I'm saying is we should have done the analysis before that we would know what would happen to us now. Okay. So we should have been on that good footing now.
We are not, sir. We are on a good footing. We are not on a bad footing. I'm just saying this is what happens with cash management on a whole.
But that's what I'm saying. What if it happens? If it reoccurs in the next 30 days, we find ourselves in a similar situation. You're telling me that you've done the analysis, that it's looking bright. But if it turns out to be the same situation now, what is our way out?
And I'm saying to you, it will not.
How are you so sure it will not? Because
I'm telling you what we have done. I am just repeating myself. Sir, I'm just saying to you.
You did not do that analysis before. Wow.
Okay. Thank you so much for calling,
I think the caller has an issue understanding what's at play here. And again, let us see what happens next 30 days. And there is no need to panic. We will pay the NIC at the end of the month because we will have the money.
We have a call. Good evening. Hello.
Good evening, Tim. How are you?
I'm okay, sir. Good evening to you. All right.
Good.
The feedback.
Minister Eubalus Raymond doing a great job.
Oh, that's the Prime Minister?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, there's a feedback. So, and then you could go ahead with your contribution.
Thank you, PM. Thank you very much, sir.
Go ahead, please, Mr. PM.
Great. I just really want to add one contribution to this. That there are things that we've been seeing for the longest time, and maybe now this is appropriate time for people to understand better what we were alluding to. We have repeated consistently that when we left government in 2011, we left a reserve of cash of $200 million. And that reserve of cash was there to anticipate any eventuality that if in fact that you have a bond that comes due or a bill comes up and you need to be able to pay that immediately, that you have your own reserves of monies to do that. The Labour Party, and in particular the Honourable Philip Pierre, has argued that that's too expensive, that if you're borrowing money, it's better to have used that $200 million to do other things. And so therefore we have found ourselves in this situation in which the government has no cash reserves. No money has been set aside in order to anticipate or to be prepared for these days when the bonds become mature. So when we talk about a sink fund, a properly managed sink fund is to know the bonds that you have,
yes,
put monies aside on an annual basis so that when the bond matures, that the ability to pay that bond is there. But what the previous government did is depleted the reserve. We have no sink fund. We have no reserve of cash. And all they have been doing is rolling over the debt. So we're never paying down on the debt. And then to make matters worse, we're accumulating more debt because we're running deficits every year which have to be financed. Since we've come into government, we have set aside already, I think it's $10 million, if I'm not mistaken, Minister.
Yes, correct, sir.
Last year.
Correct.
And I believe that we have put in another 12 million or 14 million to be put in this year, and we're continuously building back up. This is something that Sir John did extremely well. So we have found ourselves in trying now to resolve this issue. So when we keep on saying that the country is broken, basic disciplines like this, that you ought to be disciplined enough that if you borrow money, set aside the principal every year that you would have to repay so that you're in a position to repay it.
Yes.
But what the previous government did is they just kept spending the money. And they're the ones who put us in a position in which that we now have to go to NIC in order to get funds to be able to cover the possibility if that person decides not to roll over the debt. So the ability to borrow money from NIC has always existed in order to be able to help make finance our cash flow gaps, because your revenue doesn't come in on an equal basis and your expenses are not going out on an equal basis. There are many times in which your expenditure might be substantially higher than what your expenditure is going to be, but the fact is your revenue is going to come in at a later date. And so at the end of the year, it balances out. So there is nothing wrong in what we have done, but I agree with the previous caller. If we want to be able to anticipate every single eventuality, we must have the discipline of going back to having a sink fund and building up a reservoir of money. And we have committed ourselves that we would like to be able to build up a reservoir of money equivalent to our GDP, which means that like what's going on at, not to the GDP, my apologies, to the level of the expenditure of our budget. So like the central bank that has 100% coverage on all of the currency that we have in circulation, we would like it to be that we have 100% coverage of the expenditure of the state of St. Lucia. And therefore, this would instill a tremendous amount of confidence by the financial sector. And the reward of that is to be able to get now a very high credit rating. By getting a high credit rating, it instills confidence of investors into your country, and it lowers the cost of money that you're going to have. And so these are the disciplines that we have to build back. So when we say the country was broken and we must build a new St. Lucia, it's to build the St. Lucia on solid foundations that are conservative and that put this country on the right footing.
And you're saying that, Mr. Prime Minister, thereafter the government will be able to source the funds to repay the NIC?
But absolutely, because the funds are already coming in. And if we don't use the monies for the bond, then the monies go right back to them. Yeah. And the likelihood is that we're getting good signals that the bond ought to be returned over, and we have new bonds that are being issued. So it is clearly anticipated that this is just going to be a short gap methodology. Yes. And the NIC Investment Board, which is an independent of government, would have made that same assessment and understand the documents that we provided them and the analysis that was done to give them the security that that's the case. But, let's look at what's different. When the former government was in office, they were going to borrow $77 million from the NIC to do an office complex in the south. And 100% of the rent and revenue was coming from government. So I think that is going to do more to deplete the resources of the NIC than what we're talking about here is a short-term loan in order to deal with the cash flow issues. And the fact is the NIC has hundreds of millions of dollars that it has on deposit, which is having a difficulty in finding a place to be able to earn revenues back. In fact, they're lending monies to the banks, if I'm not mistaken, Minister, at a rate of 0.5%.
Correct, sir.
Right? And we've been arguing that they should make some of those monies available to the St. Lucia Development Bank, of which they're lending money to the St. Lucia Development Bank at 3%. So, look, the NIC is in very solid footing.
Very solid.
This is not going to even come close to affecting the NIC. The monies that we've taken from them are highly securitized, and we've shown them that this is really only a short-term gap method. And the fact is that this is something that has happened many times before and will continue to be in practice. It makes good business sense for the NIC in that they can earn some interest rates on monies in a short period of time with very, very, very low risk, and helps government with its own cash flow. But I agree with the previous caller. If we want to be able to not do this, then it means that government must build up its own reserves of cash, which means that the argument that we should not that we should continue running deficits is false. Okay, that is not going to solve our medium-term to longer-term plans. I also want to say that at every single presentation that we have done, and we've talked about the constraints to growth in this country, debt management is one of them. I have repeatedly said to the public of St. Lucia and to everyone, I am very concerned about the debt. But the biggest part of the debt that I'm concerned about is that 50% of our debt is in short-term instruments. meaning within 90 days to 1 year. We're trying very hard to get our bond holders to extend the period of time that we have to pay back the bonds, and also we've been trying to lower the rate. When we first came into government, the rate was up to, if I'm not mistaken, Minister, was up to 7.5%.
7.5%, yes.
All right, we've now brought it back down to, I think, 6.5%, in some cases 6%.
Yes.
So people's confidence in St. Lucia is growing. We're very focused on growing our overall economy. We're lowering the tax rates in St. Lucia. We've seen that the lowering of the tax rates is actually generating a greater amount of money.
That's
I mean,
right.
I listened to the former Minister of Commerce, Emma Hippolyte, give a presentation on national, healthcare cost and doing universal health care. And she had to admit that there was not enough monies to be able to cover it. And her argument was that we should have not lowered the VAT rate from 15% to 12.5%, and that we lost $55 million, and that's the money that could have been used to fund universal health care. Well, what we have seen is in a year and a half, we're actually now earning as much money off of the 12.5% as we were the 15%. But here's the question I have to ask her, is when the Labour Party was in government, the same way that our government put on a gas tax and put it into a lockbox to deal specifically with road redevelopment, when they introduced VAT, why didn't they take 2.5% of the VAT rate and set it aside and deal with healthcare?
In fact, PM, I suspect, I have some suspicion they would have actually increased the VAT rate from 15% to 17.5%.
Anyway, thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, just a day from Prime
Very good.
Minister Alan Chastanet. Let's take the final comments from you, Mr. Minister.
Well, Jim, again, thank you for inviting me here tonight. And as I said to you, the government is focused on improving the lives of the people of St. Lucia. We are very, very happy with the performance of the government, of the economy. We believe that we have turned things around. We have stopped the bleeding in this country. We have stopped the reversal or the reversing of things in this country as far as the economy is concerned. And we are resolute, and we are very focused on what we are doing. We will not be distracted by the opposition. We understand the political theatrics that they are doing. I want the public to understand, to know that if they need information about the performance, about anything in government, we are open as an executive. In fact, we approach and we give briefings to the media every Monday morning. That is unprecedented. Information that you need, the source is always government. We know that we are on the right path, and we are asking for the public's patience and understanding that we are trying to correct, and we are correcting a mess that we inherited under the last administration. I am very happy with the team of individuals I'm working with. The Prime Minister especially is a visionary. We have a team of cabinet members who are very dedicated in what they're doing. We are expecting even better things in the months ahead. So I want to leave these words with the public, that everything is okay in St. Lucia. The government is doing its best, and things are happening. Good things are happening in this country. We are seeing increased employment. We are seeing increased business openings. A lot of small businesses are opening shops in everywhere in St. Lucia, especially in Vieux-Fort, a place that was actually a ghost town as far as businesses are concerned. So I'm very confident that going forward, we will just do what we were elected for, and that is to improve the lives of the people of St. Lucia.
Thank you so much for being my guest, Mr. Minister, Dr. Yubellis Raymond, for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. Thank you so much for watching the broadcast and contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked.
Super
And that's the broadcast once again. My name is Timothy Polion saying good night and see you next time.